The first step in letting her regret everything is understanding that real regret is never created through force, pressure, or chasing. It's created through contrast. Contrast between who you were when she left and who you steadily become when she no longer has access to your presence, your energy, your attention. People don't regret losing someone simply because time passes. They regret it when time reveals the truth that you were far more valuable, far more rare, and far more irreplaceable than they ever realized. This process begins internally long before any external change becomes visible. It starts the moment you stop asking why she walked away and start asking why you ever let someone treat you as if you were optional. There is a quiet power in shifting your focus from her decisions to your own standards. You begin to recognize that your worth does not fluctuate based on someone else's inability to appreciate it. When you detach your identity from her validation, you reclaim something far more important than a relationship. You reclaim your center. And once you regain your center, everything changes. You speak differently, move differently, carry yourself differently. You no longer navigate the world as someone seeking approval, but as someone who honors his own direction. This internal shift is the foundation upon which all regret is built, because people only realize what they lost when they see what you become once you finally stop giving them access to you. As you grow, you stop repeating the same emotional patterns that kept you stuck. You no longer beg for clarity from someone who wasn't willing to give it. You no longer replay conversations looking for the moment things went wrong. And you no longer over-explain yourself to someone who was committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, your focus sharpens. Your goals return. Your discipline deepens. And little by little, the version of you who tolerated neglect fades away, replaced by someone who demands respect simply by the way he lives his life. This transformation is never loud, never dramatic, never desperate. It's subtle. It's controlled. And that subtlety is exactly what creates the strongest impact. Because when she eventually looks back, and she won't just see someone she left. She will see someone she underestimated. She will see a man who didn't crumble, didn't chase, didn't collapse under the weight of heartbreak. She will see someone who evolved quietly, intentionally, powerfully. That evolution is what produces regret, not as a weapon, but as a natural reaction to losing someone who grew into the person she always expected him to be after she walked away. The truth is, people rarely regret losing someone who stays stuck. They regret losing the person who rises. And as you rise, you begin to understand something deeper, that her regret is never the goal. It's merely a byproduct of you stepping into your fullest self. When your energy shifts from trying to prove your value to simply embodying it, life responds differently. People respond differently. And ironically, the person who once walked away begins to feel the distance more strongly than you do. Not because you punished her, but because you became someone she can no longer reach. That is the quiet art of letting her regret everything, becoming the version of yourself you should have been all along. The second key point revolves around emotional distance. Not the cold, vengeful kind that tries to punish her, but the kind that naturally forms when a man stops pouring his energy into someone who no longer values it. This distance is not created by blocking her, attacking her, or proving anything. It happens when you reclaim the emotional space you had given away so freely, the space where your attention, care, and effort once lived. When you stop feeding that space with constant thoughts of her, it begins to shrink. And in that shrinking, she begins to feel something she never expected, the weight of your absence. Because the truth is, people rarely miss you when you're still mentally available to them. They miss you when you withdraw from the emotional arena they once dominated. When you stop hoping for her text, stop checking her social media, stop replaying the past in your mind, you create a silence she can feel, even if she pretends she can't. This silence is powerful because it's not forced. It's not a strategy. It's simply the result of you finally choosing yourself. And ironically, choosing yourself is often the very moment someone begins to see what they lost. As you emotionally step back, your energy shifts. You're no longer reactive. You're no longer triggered by her decisions or influenced by her inconsistencies. That emotional neutrality becomes the strongest signal you ever send, not because it's meant to provoke regret, but because it reflects a man who no longer lives in emotional dependency. You detach without resentment. You detach without drama. You detach because you finally understand that peace is more important than proximity. And she feels this shift whether she admits it or not. When you no longer respond instantly, when you're no longer available for her convenience, when your life begins moving in a direction she's not part of, the dynamic changes. People subconsciously sense when someone they once controlled emotionally has stepped out of their orbit. Suddenly, the attention she took for granted is gone. Suddenly, the emotional access she thought she'd always have is closed. It's in this moment that regret begins to form, not because you're trying to make her feel it, but because she realizes she misjudged your strength. Your distance creates curiosity. Curiosity creates reflection. Reflection creates regret. And the more she reflects, the more she begins to understand that your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did. She starts to notice the difference between men who chase her and men who outgrow her. She starts comparing the emotional connection she once had with you to the shallow attention she gets elsewhere. And slowly, she begins to recognize that emotional maturity is far more attractive than temporary validation. This kind of emotional distance also brings you clarity. You begin to see her not as the person you idealized, but as the person she truly was in the relationship. With space, emotions settle, illusions fade, and truth becomes clearer. You realize that the version of her you once held on to existed more in your mind than in reality. And that truth makes it easier to move forward with strength instead of bitterness. In the end, the distance you create becomes a mirror she cannot avoid, a mirror reflecting what she had, what she lost, and what she can never fully reclaim. The third key point is all about rebuilding your value, not for her, not to prove anything, but because the moment you begin investing in yourself instead of obsessing over what happened, everything in your life starts to shift. And this shift is what makes her wake up to the reality of who you actually were, not the version she convinced herself you were. When you pour energy into your growth, your appearance, your goals, your mindset, your discipline, you automatically create a contrast between the man you used to be and the man you're becoming. That contrast is what triggers regret more than anything else. Because here's the truth: most people avoid regret is rarely born from missing someone. It's born from realizing that person improved after you. It's born from watching someone you dismissed evolve into someone you can no longer access. When you stop chasing her and start chasing your own potential, you become harder to replace, harder to forget, and harder to ignore. And that's exactly when she starts seeing you differently. The moment you redirect your energy toward your purpose, you stop being that man who waited around for her affection or validation. You become a man who is too focused, too grounded, and too aligned with his own life to be emotionally dependent on anyone. And paradoxically, this is the version of you she was hoping you wouldn't become, because now she can't manipulate your emotions, predict your actions, or rely on your consistency. Your growth forces her to confront the reality that she underestimated the kind of man you were capable of becoming. As you elevate yourself, your presence becomes stronger without you even trying. You speak differently. You carry yourself differently. You walk into a room with a sharper sense of identity. You make decisions without hesitation. You start setting boundaries with confidence instead of fear. Every part of your aura begins to communicate something She didn't expect that you have options, direction, and self-respect. And nothing triggers regret more deeply than realizing she lost someone who eventually became everything she wanted. But this kind of growth doesn't come from pretending. It comes from doing the hard, uncomfortable work, rebuilding your confidence, improving your emotional control, upgrading your environment, and becoming a man who leads his own life instead of being dragged by emotions. As you focus on becoming stronger mentally, physically, spiritually, and financially, you rise above the version of yourself that once let her opinions define your worth. You start to see that your value was never lost. It was simply buried under the weight of misplaced effort and emotional dependence. And once you grow past the old you, something powerful happens. You stop seeing her as the prize. You begin to recognize that the real prize was always your potential. The more you evolve, the clearer it becomes that the breakup, the rejection, or the disappointment wasn't punishment. It was redirection. It pushed you toward becoming the man you were supposed to be all along. And that realization alone is enough to shift the entire narrative. Because while she may start regretting what she lost, you begin realizing what you gained. And that gain, your growth, your strength, your evolution, is something no one can take from you. There's a turning point in every man's journey where silence becomes more powerful than any argument, explanation, or attempt at proving your worth. And that turning point is exactly what the fourth key point is about: learning to detach emotionally in a way that forces her to sit with her own actions. Because when you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, when you stop trying to convince her of anything, you take away the emotional fuel she used to rely on. Your silence becomes a mirror, and suddenly she's face to face with the consequences of how she treated you. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about everything. It means you stop caring about the things that drain your power. It means you no longer hand over your peace every time she withdraws affection or gives mixed signals. It means you stop letting her moods dictate your self-worth. When you detach, you're no longer chasing reassurance or trying to decode her behavior. You operate from stability instead of insecurity, from clarity instead of confusion. And the moment she feels that shift, everything changes. The reason emotional detachment hits harder than anger is because it shows her something she never expected. You're no longer emotionally controlled by her. You're not moved by her distance. You're not shaken by her silence. And you're not waiting around for her to decide how she feels. You remove her from the center of your thoughts, and that's when she starts to lose the comfort she once had. Because for the first time, she realizes she can't push your buttons anymore. She can't guilt trip you. She can't manipulate your empathy. And she can't pull you back in with the bare minimum effort. Women don't regret losing a man who argues, complains, or begs for attention. They regret losing a man who becomes emotionally unavailable at the exact moment they believed he would always be there. Your detachment forces her to reflect on everything she took for granted: your consistency, your patience, your effort, your presence. She begins to compare the man who once prioritized her with the man who now places himself first. And that contrast hits harder than any breakup speech ever could. As you detach, you also stop rewarding disrespect with access. You stop responding instantly. You stop entertaining half-hearted effort. Your life becomes too full for emotional games. This doesn't just create distance, it creates uncertainty. She starts wondering what shifted inside you. She starts wondering who you're becoming. She starts wondering who you might be giving your time and energy to. And when a woman no longer feels certain about her place in your life, regret begins to creep in. But the most important part is this: emotional detachment gives you freedom. It frees you from the emotional roller coaster. It frees you from reacting to temporary feelings. It frees you from losing yourself just to keep someone else. And as you step into that freedom, you gain something far more valuable than her attention. You gain control over your own emotional world. That level of control makes you more stable, more grounded, and more attractive without even trying. When she sees that her absence doesn't disrupt your peace, that her silence doesn't shake your identity, and that her distance doesn't stop your progress, she realizes she misjudged your strength. Regret begins when the narrative she created about you no longer matches the man you're becoming. And emotional detachment is the key that unlocks that realization. One of the most powerful shifts a man can make is learning to channel his energy back into his mission, the thing that gives him purpose, direction, and internal drive. Because the fifth key point is all about this simple truth: when a man puts his mission first, everything else falls into place, if including how a woman views him. A man with purpose moves differently. He thinks differently. He carries himself with a sense of certainty that can't be shaken by someone's attitude, moods, or mixed signals. And that's exactly what creates the kind of regret that no conversation, no argument, and no emotional plea could ever create. When you start prioritizing your mission, you naturally stop obsessing over what she's doing, who she's talking to, or whether she's giving you enough attention. You don't have time to overanalyze her behavior because your energy is invested in something bigger, building your life. Purpose becomes the anchor that stabilizes you, the compass that guides you, and the engine that pushes you forward. And as you rise in your discipline, your income, your fitness, your vision, your skills, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Because a man who is dialed in on his mission is not desperate, he's not frantic, and he's not waiting for someone to validate him. That shift in priorities sends a message without you having to speak a single word. You are a man in motion. You are a man who cannot be stopped. You are a man who is not defined by who stays or who leaves. This is the moment when she realizes that her presence in your life is not the center of your identity, and that realization alone plants the first seeds of regret. Women regret losing a man who grows beyond their expectations. They regret losing a man who becomes more disciplined, more focused, more successful after the relationship ends or after they start pulling back. It's not the absence that triggers regret. It's the evolution. When she sees you advancing without her, achieving without her, improving without her influence, she begins to replay the moments she dismissed you. She starts second guessing the decision she made. She starts comparing the man she left with the man she's now watching from a distance. And the more committed you are to your mission, the more she feels that distance grow. Not in a physical sense, but in a spiritual and emotional sense. She starts to realize she no longer has access to you the way she once did. Your time becomes more valuable. Your confidence becomes quieter but stronger. Your standards rise. Your goals elevate. Everything about you begins to shift upward, and this creates a pressure she never anticipated. Because now, if she ever wanted to come back into your life, she would have to level up too. And that's not something everyone is willing or able to do. A man with purpose becomes magnetic, not because he's trying to impress anyone, but because purpose gives him a sense of direction that naturally draws people in. You start attracting better opportunities, better relationships, better energy, and better outcomes simply because you're operating from a higher state. And that magnetism becomes a reminder to her that she underestimated your potential, that she misjudged your trajectory, and that she didn't see who you were destined to become. By focusing on your mission, you take back every ounce of power you once gave away. You stop chasing temporary validation and start building lasting value. And in doing so, you create the ultimate form of regret. The kind that comes when she realizes she walked away from the version of you she always hoped you'd become. The sixth key point is all about stepping into a version of yourself that no longer seeks closure, revenge, or validation. It's about becoming a man whose self-worth is so rooted, so unshakable that nothing she does, not her silence, not her distance, not her attitude, can disrupt your internal state. Because the highest form of regret a woman ever feels comes when she realizes you've outgrown the need for her to understand what she lost. You no longer need her to apologize. You no longer need her to see your value. You no longer need her to come back. Your strength stops depending on her recognition, and that shift creates a shockwave she never expected. When you reach this point, you stop waiting for her to realize she was wrong. You stop waiting for her to return. You stop waiting for that moment when she finally sees what you brought to the table. Instead, you accept the truth. Not everyone will recognize your value at the moment they have access to you. Some people only recognize it when access is gone. And the moment you let go of hoping for her realization, you free yourself from the emotional prison you didn't even know you were living in. Because the strongest man is the one who understands that closure is internal, not external. He doesn't wait for someone else to make peace with him. He creates his own peace, and he moves forward with dignity. And when she sees that her ability to influence your emotions has faded completely, regret begins to tear at her. Because what really hurts someone is not your anger, not your sadness, not your frustration. What hurts them is your indifference. The day she realizes she no longer holds emotional power over you is the day everything she thought she understood about you changes. You begin to operate from a different place. You build your life without looking back. You grow without broadcasting it. You heal without announcing it. You reinvent yourself quietly, and she notices. Not because you're trying to show her anything, but because evolution is impossible to ignore. Your energy becomes more grounded, your mindset becomes sharper, your standards get higher. You no longer accept the bare minimum. You no longer tolerate mixed signals. You no longer entertain anything that pulls you backward. And that creates a new dynamic, one where she must face the reality that she no longer fits into the life you're building. This is where the deepest regret is born, not from losing you, but from realizing she lost the version of herself she once was when she was with you. She remembers how you treated her, how you supported her, how you believed in her, how you were patient, loyal, and committed. She remembers the effort you poured into the connection. But now, when she tries to compare that version of you with the stronger, more evolved version standing in front of her, she recognizes the truth. She can't approach you the same way anymore. She doesn't have access to the old you, and she doesn't have a claim to the new you. And the most powerful part is that you're not doing any of this for her. You're doing it for yourself, for your future, for your purpose, for your peace. You're evolving because you refuse to remain the man who tolerated disrespect, confusion, or emotional inconsistency. You're becoming someone who lives by principle, who values himself deeply, and who understands that walking away is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself. When a woman realizes that you've genuinely outgrown the version of her that mistreated or underestimated you, that's when she feels the full weight of regret. It hits quietly, but it hits deeply. And by the time she understands what she lost, you've already stepped into a life where her validation is no longer needed.